While the daughters of the most dangerous syndicates in East Asia were currently assembling in a grand ballroom to tear each other apart for the title of Mafia Queen, the man they were fighting for was sitting on a dusty floor cushion in a hidden riverfront diner, sweating profusely. The feared, multi-billionaire chairman of Guryong had just entered a high-stakes hunger strike against a stubborn foreign school teacher, vowing that if she didn't eat her jollof rice, the entire criminal underworld would starve with her. In the rugged, fog-enshrouded valleys of South Korea sits Guryong, a town that operates entirely outside the boundaries of normal law. The undisputed ruler of this province is known only as the chairman. He is a ghost, a terrifying, legendary figure who commands a massive criminal empire spanning shipping lines, real estate, and international trade. The chairman is a traditionalist but deeply ruthless. Under his rule, every merchant, official, and family in the town pays him homage. It is a local custom that the people literally feed him, sending the finest harvests, rarest goods, and tribute to his hidden mountain estate just to stay in his good graces. Yet, despite his absolute control, nobody in the village has ever seen his face. He rules through fear, whispered commands, and his fiercely loyal right-hand man, Minho. The town was recently thrown into absolute chaos when a decree left the mountain estate. The chairman was looking for a wife, but this would not be an ordinary courtship. It was to be a ruthless, multi-stage competition. The town's elite, along with powerful families from overseas, immediately began grooming their daughters. Women were being trained in martial arts, political strategy, elegance, and cutthroat cunning. To the people of Guryong, winning his hand meant elevating a family to royalty. To lose meant irrelevance. While the rest of the valley burned with competitive fever, Chidera Olusanmi was completely detached from the madness. Born in Lagos, Nigeria, Chidera was the daughter of highly educated academics who later transitioned into the international import-export business. Education was the cornerstone of her upbringing. Chidera was brilliant. She graduated at the top of her class from the University of Ibadan with a bachelor's degree in English literature, followed by a master's degree in applied linguistics and a specialized certification in international corporate law. She hadn't planned on living in a remote Korean village. Her parents had relocated their business hub to East Asia years prior to manage trade routes between West Africa and South Korea. Wanting to be close to her family while establishing her own financial independence, Chidera accepted a prestigious contract as a foreign expert and English teacher at Guryong's top academy and middle school. To Chidera, her qualifications weren't just titles, they were her armor. She didn't care about the local gossip, she didn't care about the shadowy mafia boss, and she certainly didn't care about a marriage competition. Her daily routine was clockwork. She was a woman focused entirely on her own empire. She wasn't looking for fame, she wasn't looking for trouble, and she refused to let her life be dictated by the frantic whims of a town chasing a dangerous man's shadow. It was late May, and the town square was deafening. Banners for the upcoming marriage trials hung from every storefront. Crowds of young women dressed in traditional hanboks and modern designer suits were practicing speech patterns and combat drills in the local pavilions. Chidera walked past the commotion, her eyes fixed on her tablet as she reviewed a translation contract. To her, the entire spectacle was exhausting. She adjusted her heavy tote bag filled with midterm essays and bypassed the noisy main streets. Seeking peace, she turned onto her usual route home, the old bamboo grove path. The towering stalks of bamboo filtered the fading amber sunlight, casting long, dramatic shadows across the dirt road. It was quiet, isolated, and completely detached from the town's hysteria. She walked with a confident, measured pace, eager to get to her desk and finish her evening work. She had no idea that just a few yards ahead, resting in the deep shadows of the bamboo leaves, stood the very myth the entire town was fighting to possess. This brings the narrative right up to the moment he steps out of the shadows to question her. The chairman was currently hiding behind a thick stalk of bamboo like a common trespasser, wearing an oversized faded worker's jacket that smelled faintly of diesel and old onions. He was supposed to look like a humble laborer blending into the rural scenery. Instead, he just felt ridiculous. Then the heavy silence of the grove was broken by the rhythmic, confident clack, clack, clack of sensible, low heels hitting the dirt path. Chidera stepped into the clearing, completely engrossed in her own world. She was expertly juggling a massive tote bag that looked heavy enough to contain bricks, an open iPad showing a dense legal contract, and a half-eaten Korean spicy rice cake, tteokbokki, held precariously on a wooden skewer. Determined to make an impression of quiet, terrifying gravity, the chairman stepped smoothly out from the shadows, crossing his arms. He adjusted his low-profile cap, casting a dramatic shadow over his eyes. "You're late," he said, deploying his best low, gravelly movie villain baritone. "Or perhaps you're lost. Aren't you supposed to be at the community hall? The registration for the chairman's trials closes tonight." Chidera stopped dead in her tracks. She didn't scream. She didn't look terrified. Instead, she slowly lowered her iPad, took a deliberate bite of her spicy rice cake, chewed thoughtfully, and blinked at him. "Sir," she said, her voice dripping with the calm, patronizing patience of a middle school teacher dealing with a troublesome 12-year-old. "First of all, you frightened my rice cake. Second of all, jumping out of plants at dusk is a terrible way to make friends. Are you okay? Do you need a map?" The chairman's brain briefly short-circuited. Frightened her rice cake? Nobody spoke to him like this. Nobody. "I do not need a map," he growled, trying to regain his menacing aura. He took a predatory step forward, towering over her. Every young woman in this valley is currently trying to prove she is strong enough to stand by the chairman's side. Yet, you are walking toward the edge of town with school supplies. Chidera let out a loud, genuine snort of amusement. She shifted her heavy tote bag to her other shoulder, nearly hitting him in the ribs with the stray binder. "Oh, you're one of those," she said, chuckling. "Let me guess. You've been watching too many K-dramas. Or you've bet your entire month's salary on one of those poor girls in the town square. Let me tell you something. Mr. Tall and Brooding, I have 20 essays on Macbeth to grade, and 3 international legal documents to translate before midnight. That is my reality. I don't have time for the local mob boss pageant." "The pageant?" The chairman stared at her. His hands, which had signed decrees that moved billions of dollars, twitched in his pockets. "You speak lightly of a man who controls the literal air you breathe in this province. Becoming his wife means absolute power, unimaginable wealth, and security. You aren't even tempted to try? Chidera completely cracked up. She laughed so hard she had to lean slightly against a nearby bamboo stalk for support, keeping her skewer safely pointed away from her blouse. "Why on earth would I compete for a man?" she asked, wiping a tear of mirth from her eye. "Let's look at the logistics here. If a man is genuinely mine, he will find me. I am not going to fight a crowd of hungry women in a stadium for some guy who doesn't even know my name and clearly doesn't love me." To compete for a title like Mafia wife is basically agreeing that you are completely disposable the moment a younger, faster martial artist comes along. No, thank you. I am a whole master's degree holder. I am not disposable, and I don't need a dangerous status symbol to validate my taxes. The chairman stood perfectly, entirely still. For a fraction of a second, his heavy, calculated mask completely collapsed. His jaw didn't drop, but his eyes widened in a look of profound, stunned fascination. She wasn't just beautiful. She was sharp, hilarious, and entirely unimpressed by his whole universe.
"A rare
"And stubborn philosophy," he murmured, his voice losing its forced gruffness and turning into something genuinely intrigued. He leaned down slightly, bringing his face into the fading sunlight. What if the chairman is actually a good man beneath the terrifying reputation? What if he just wants someone real? Chidera looked up into his sharp, dark eyes. For a brief second, her breath hitched. Up close, under that ridiculous worker's cap, this man was devastatingly handsome. He had the bone structure of a high-end model and eyes that looked like they could see through steel. But she quickly recovered her composure, shaking her head. "A good man doesn't make women fight like gladiators in a coliseum just to get a dinner date," she shot back, her wit flashing instantly. "A good man searches for a partner, not a trophy to polish." "Now, if you'll excuse me, Mr. Underground Philosopher, the night is getting cold. My rice cake is freezing and Shakespeare waits for no one." With a cheerful, mocking little wave of her wooden skewer, Chidera adjusted her heavy bag and walked right past him, her heels clicking merrily down the path. The chairman didn't move. He stood frozen in the middle of the dirt path, completely captivated, watching her retreating figure until she rounded the bend and disappeared from sight. The silence of the bamboo grove settled back in, but his chest was reeling. Slowly, a rare, dangerous smile touched his lips. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his sleek black phone, and dialed his right-hand man. On the other end of the line, Minho answered instantly, his voice tight with the stress of managing a chaotic estate. "Sir? The daughters of the Busan syndicate and the Seoul Triad chiefs have just arrived for the preliminary trials. They are expecting your silhouette behind the screen. We are ready to begin." "Cancel my evening meetings, Minho," the chairman commanded, his voice a low absolute vibration. "And postpone the trials. Tell them the chairman is delayed." A heavy, stunned silence hung over the line. Minho gripped his phone in absolute disbelief. "Sir? Postpone? These are the most powerful families in East Asia. Are you saying you want to risk a political incident? Where are you?" "I am on the bamboo path," the chairman replied, his eyes still fixed on the empty road where Chidera had walked. The forced gruffness of his disguise was completely gone, replaced by a dizzying, intense excitement. "Find out everything about the foreign English teacher who works in this valley. find out her name, her schedule, and what she likes to eat. She just threatened me with a rice cake, Minho, and I think I've just found my woman. While a quiet peace settled over the small riverfront restaurant, the rest of Guryong was descending into absolute chaos. At the chairman's mountain estate, the grand ballroom had been transformed into a tense, high-stakes arena. Massive silk banners hung from the vaulted ceilings, and the air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and nervous sweat. Dozens of young women, the daughters of ruthless Busan corporate tycoons, fierce Seoul syndicate leaders, and ambitious local merchants were lined up in flawless formations. Some were mentally rehearsing complex political treatises, while others discreetly flexed their knuckles, prepared for the physical combat trials. Minho stood at the front of the grand hall, rubbing his temples as a furious triad boss demanded to know why the chairman's throne behind the frosted glass screen remained empty. The chairman is observing your discipline from a secure, undisclosed location. Minho lied smoothly to the restless crowd, adjusting his glasses while sweating through his tailored suit. The preliminary evaluations of your posture, patience, and resolve begin now. The selection will continue through the week. Do not lose focus. In reality, Minho knew exactly where his terrifying boss was. He glanced at his phone, tracking a secure GPS dot that was currently stationary at a tiny, run-down restaurant by the muddy Guryong riverbanks. Inside the private curtained alcove of the restaurant, the heavy atmosphere of the Mafia underworld didn't exist. There were no syndicates, no political marriages, and no expectations. There was only the rich, aromatic steam of ginseng chicken soup rising between Chidera and the man she knew only as Kong Dae. The elderly restaurant owner had long since retreated to the kitchen, terrified of breathing too loudly near his undercover sovereign. So, Chidera said, using her chopsticks to expertly separate a piece of tender chicken, your logistics company must be very demanding if it keeps you wandering around dark paths at night. Do you ever actually rest, Kong Dae? Gunday let out a soft chuckle, pouring her a glass of barley tea. My work involves managing very volatile assets, people who don't like to follow rules. Rest is a luxury I haven't been able to afford for a long time. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the wooden table, his dark eyes fixed entirely on her. But tonight is the closest I've come to it. Chidera raised an eyebrow, a playful smirk touching her lips. Is that your way of telling me I'm good company, or are you just trying to flatter the person who threatened you with a rice cake? Both, he admitted without a shred of hesitation, his voice dropping into that low, mesmerizing baritone. In my world, everyone speaks in riddles. Everyone wants a piece of my time, my influence, or my resources. But you look at me and see nothing but a man sitting across from you. It's refreshing. That's because I don't judge a book by its cover. Nor do I care about what people can do for me, Chidera said softly, her expression turning reflective. The words hit Kong Dae like a physical blow. For years he had been conditioned to believe that strength meant absolute ruthlessness. Yet listening to this foreign English teacher speak with such grounded, unshakable wisdom, he felt a profound shift inside his chest. She wasn't just intelligent. She possessed a quiet emotional gravity that anchored his chaotic soul. They sat in that alcove for hours, exchanging contact information under the guise of sharing language lessons. They talked about the architecture of Lagos, the harsh winters of Gangwon province, and their completely opposing philosophies on life. By the time they finished, the stone pot was empty, and the midnight frost had begun to paint the restaurant windows. As Kang Dai walked Chidera back to the entrance of her apartment building, the distant, colorful fireworks from the mountain estate illuminated the night sky. The bride selection ceremonies were officially underway, lighting up the valley in brilliant flashes of red and gold. Chidera looked up at the sky, shaking her head with a small sigh. The circus continues. I wonder which poor woman will win the prize of being a ghost's wife. Kang Dae looked at her profile, his heart hammering with a fierce, absolute certainty. The whole town could fight for his shadow, but he had already given his heart to the woman standing right next to him. Perhaps the ghost has already chosen his wife, Kang Dae murmured softly, gently taking her heavy tote bag from her shoulder and placing it in her hands. And perhaps she just doesn't know it yet. Chidera laughed, thinking he was just being poetic. Good night, Kang Dae. Text me when you get home safely. Don't go jumping out of any more bushes. Good night, Chidera, he replied, watching her step inside the secure glass doors. The moment the doors locked, the warmth in Kang Dae's face instantly vanished. The gentle logistics manager disappeared, and the cold, terrifying aura of the chairman returned. He turned on his heel and walked toward the shadows where a sleek, blacked-out SUV was idling. Minho stepped out of the driver's seat, holding a tablet with live video feeds of the furious syndicate daughters still waiting up at the mansion. Sir, Minho whispered carefully, the brides are demanding your presence for the second stage of the trials tomorrow morning. The selection cannot be delayed any further without causing a war between the factions. What are your orders? The chairman climbed into the back seat, staring out the tinted window at Chidera's brightly lit apartment window. Let the competition continue, Minho, the chairman commanded coldly. Let them fight, let them train, and let them waste their time. They want a throne, but I want a home. Keep the trials going as a distraction while I win my woman. Over the next few months, Kang Dae lived a double life that was as exhausting as it was exhilarating. To the underworld, he was the ruthless, stone-cold chairman holding the syndicates at bay. But the moment he stepped onto the cobblestone streets of Guryong, he shed his tailored suits, put on his faded canvas jacket, and became just Kang Dae, an ordinary logistics worker who was completely, hopelessly in love. They became an inseparable couple. They spent rainy afternoons crammed into tiny comic book cafes, sharing a single blanket and arguing over the plot lines. They frequented local street markets, where Chidera would playfully bargain with the vendors in her broken, heavily accented Korean, while Kang Dae stood behind her, silently flashing his eyes at the merchants so they would accept whatever ridiculous price she offered. They celebrated small victories together. When Chidera's translation firm landed its first major international contract, Kang Dae took her to a windy hill overlooking the terraced valleys. They drank cheap convenience store wine from paper cups, laughing until their stomachs hurt. For Chidera, he was her peace, a grounded, hard-working man who truly listened to her. But for Kang Dae, every beautiful moment was clouded by a suffocating, paralyzing fear, the truth. Every time he gathered the courage to confess, it blew up in his face. Once, while sitting on a park bench, he took her hand and looked deeply into her eyes. "Chidera, what if I told you I'm not who you think I am?" he had whispered, his heart pounding. "What if I told you I am actually the chairman?" Chidera had stared at him for a beat, completely blank-faced, before bursting into a fit of uncontrolled giggles. She aggressively ruffled his hair, nearly knocking his worker's cap off. "And I am the Queen of England," she had wheezed, wiping a tear from her eye. "Oh, Kangdae, please. You get stressed out when the grocery store runs out of your favorite ramen. You expect me to believe you run a mafia empire? You're hilarious." He had laughed along with her, a hollow, terrified sound. She took it as a joke every single time. It terrified him to his core. He realized that if she found out the truth from anyone else, the fragile, beautiful world they had built would shatter. And then the final day of the bride selection arrived. The grand finale of the selection was a massive, public-facing event held at the outer pavilion of the chairman's fortress. The entire town had gathered, and security was suffocating. For 3 days, Kangdae had begged Chidera to go with him. "Why on earth do you want to go watch that circus?" Chidera had complained, fiercely folding her laundry. "I told you I don't care about that faceless tyrant." "Just to see the spectacle," Kangdae pleaded, using his best puppy dog eyes. "Think of it as a cultural study. Plus, I have a friend who works security there. He got us passes. Please, Chidera, do it for me." With a dramatic roll of her eyes and a heavy sigh, Chidera finally relented. "Fine, but we are leaving the moment it gets boring." An hour later, they stood at the towering iron gates of the mountain estate. The atmosphere was electric and deeply intimidating. Elite guards in matching black suits and earpieces were turning away families, screening every guest with military precision. Kangdae, true to his disguise, was wearing his usual simple denim jacket and a plain white t-shirt. Chidera wore a modest but elegant emerald green wrap dress. As they reached the front of the line, a massive, burly guard stepped forward, his eyes sweeping over Kangdae's ordinary attire with blatant scorn. "Lounge passes and VIP invitations only," the guard barked, putting a heavy hand on Kangdae's shoulder to push him back. "The public viewing area is a mile down the hill. Move along, peasant." Chidera's blood instantly boiled. She stepped forward to defend her man, but before she could open her mouth, Kangdae's posture shifted. For a split second, the aura of the ordinary guy vanished. He didn't move an inch against the guard's hand. Instead, he slowly tilted his head up, his dark eyes locking onto the guard with a cold, lethal gaze that made the air freeze. The guard's breath hitched. A sudden primal instinct told him he was looking into the eyes of a predator. Before a scene could erupt, the iron gates flew open. Minho rushed out, his face pale and sweating. He took in the scene instantly, the guard's hand on the chairman's shoulder, and looked like he was about to faint. "Hands off!" Minho roared at the guard, quickly pushing him away. Minho looked at Kangdae, his eyes wide with a frantic, silent apology. He couldn't bow or say sir without alerting the massive crowd, so he forced a stiff, formal nod. These are the chairman's personal guests of honor. They are cleared for the inner sanctum. Move!" The guard scrambled backward, bowing repeatedly. Chidera blinked in confusion, looking at Minho, then at Kang Dai. "Wow," Chidera whispered as they walked through the grand gates. "Your friend in security must be the actual head of the department. He looks terrified of losing his job." "He just takes his logistics very seriously," Kangda murmured, his heart doing flips in his chest. They were led into the breathtaking amphitheater of the estate. The grandeur was overwhelming. The upper tiers were packed with shouting villagers, while the main floor featured a massive red carpet where the final 10 contestants stood. These women were the elite, dressed in stunning, jewel-toned, traditional hanboks, their faces painted to perfection, standing with rigid, calculated confidence. Chidera and Kang Dae were seated in a secluded, come-visibility VIP balcony overlooking the entire arena. As the traditional drums began to roll, echoing off the mountain walls, the crowd fell into a dead, suffocating silence. The host took the microphone. "The hour has arrived. The chairman will now take his throne to announce his chosen bride." Kang Dai stood up, his face pale. He looked down at Chidera, his hands trembling slightly. "Chidera, I have to step out for a moment," he said, his voice strained. "My friend, the security guy, needs me to check on a logistics issue near the back. I'll be right back." Chidera grabbed his hand, her brow furrowing with genuine concern. "Right now, the show is literally starting. Don't get lost, Kang Dae." "I won't," he whispered. He leaned down, pressing a soft, lingering kiss to her forehead. "I promise." He turned and walked out of the balcony, leaving her alone in the massive crowd. 10 minutes passed. The tension in the arena was thick enough to cut with a knife. Suddenly, the heavy double doors of the grand upper pavilion swung open. A collective gasp rippled through thousands of people. Out stepped a man flanked by a dozen heavily armed guards and Minho. He was dressed in a breathtaking, custom-tailored, midnight black suit with subtle silver embroidery along the lapels. His hair was perfectly styled back, exposing his sharp, aristocratic jawline and fierce, commanding eyes. He walked with an absolute, terrifying power that demanded the room's oxygen. Chidera leaned over the balcony railing, squinting down at the figure walking toward the grand throne. Chidera froze. The world around her instantly went entirely silent. Her breath left her lungs in a sharp, ragged gasp. Her hands gripped the iron railing so tightly her knuckles turned white. "That voice?" The chairman slowly tilted his head upward, looking directly past the elite syndicates, past the beautiful contestants on the red carpet, straight up into the VIP balcony. His dark, fierce eyes locked perfectly onto Chidera's stunned, wide-eyed face. An electric shock passed between them. Chidera felt her knees go weak. It was him. Her ordinary, ruminating, clumsy, sweet Kang Dae was the faceless dragon of Guryong. The chairman turned back to the crowd, a proud, triumphant smile breaking across his face. He didn't look at the 10 elite contestants standing on the carpet. He didn't even acknowledge them. 4 months, the chairman's voice echoed proudly through the valley. This town has been consumed by a madness. Powerful families have brought their daughters, offering strength, wealth, and status. You all wanted a queen to sit on a throne built of fear. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his eyes never leaving Chidera. But from the very first day, I met a woman who didn't care about the chairman. A woman who threatened me with a spicy rice cake when I tried to look intimidating in a bamboo grove. A light murmur of utter confusion rippled through the elite crowd. The contestants looked at each other, bewildered. She looked at me in my dirtiest, most ordinary clothes, and she didn't see power. She saw a human being, he continued, his voice ringing with absolute devotion, bragging proudly to the entire underworld. She taught me that true strength isn't the power to be cruel, but the choice to be decent. She's a woman of unparalleled intellect, a master of languages, a scholar who builds her own empire with her own hands, completely unbothered by the shallow greed of this world. She told me that if a man is hers, he will find her. The chairman raised his hand, pointing it directly up at the VIP balcony, his face radiant with an untouchable pride. I've spent months trying to be man enough for her. The competition is over because my heart was captured on a dirt path long ago. I choose no one on this floor. The crowd held its breath, the silence deafening as everyone turned their heads to look up at the lone, stunning Nigerian woman standing in the emerald dress. The chairman smiled, his voice softening into a tone meant only for her, though the whole world could hear it. I choose you, Chidera. Come down and take your place beside me. Up in the VIP balcony, Chidera felt the eyes of thousands of strangers burning into her skin. The heavy traditional drums had ceased, replaced by a suffocating, ringing silence. Below her, the daughters of the powerful syndicate stood like frozen statues, their faces twisted in mixtures of shock, humiliation, and brewing rage. Minho stood near the stage, holding his breath, his eyes darting frantically between his terrifying boss and the young woman in the emerald green dress. Chidera's mind was a roaring storm. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Every instinct she possessed screamed at her to turn around, run down the back stairs, and never look back at this valley again. But Chidera was a scholar of strategy and law. She understood the fragile mechanics of power. She looked at the armed guards lining the walls, the restless crowd, and the absolute finality in Kang Dae's snow, the chairman's eyes. To make a scene right now, to reject him loudly in front of his ruthless empire, would not just humiliate him. It would trigger an immediate, violent bloodbath. The pride of the syndicates had already been deeply wounded. If she showed weakness or panicked, she would become a target before she even left the gates. So, she drew a deep, stabilizing breath. She forced her trembling hands to steady against her sides. With a calm, slow, and remarkably dignified grace, Chidera stepped out of the balcony. She walked down the grand stone staircase, her low heels clicking softly against the marble, echoing through the silent amphitheater. She kept her chin high, her posture unyielding, playing the role of the obedient, chosen bride perfectly for the sake of the crowd. When she reached the red carpet, the contestants parted for her like the Red Sea, their eyes flashing with silent daggers. Chidera didn't look at them. She walked straight up to the chairman. He looked at her with a mixture of intense pride and a lingering, desperate vulnerability, offering his arm to her. Chidera placed her hand on his sleeve. To the outside world, she was a submissive, willing partner, accepting her destiny. But beneath her palm, she could feel his muscles tense. She didn't smile. She didn't say a word. The chairman turned to the crowd, his voice booming one last time. The selection is concluded. Dismissed. The moment the grand iron doors of the chairman's private quarters slammed shut, cutting them off from the rest of the world, the heavy silence broke. Minho had stayed outside to handle the furious syndicate leaders, leaving the two of them entirely alone in the massive, opulent study. The chairman turned to her, instantly shedding his terrifying mafia posture. He took a step toward her, his hands extended, his face full of desperate panic. "Chidera, please let me explain." "Don't touch me." Her voice wasn't a scream. It was a razor-sharp, freezing whisper that instantly locked him in his tracks. The obedient, quiet teacher from the arena vanished. Chidera tore her hand away as if his very presence burned her. She stepped back, her chest heaving, her eyes blazing with a fierce, untamable fury that he had never seen before. The true colors of a woman who had been deeply betrayed finally washed over the room. "Chidera, I only lied because I was terrified of losing you," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "Every woman in this town wants the title. I just wanted someone to know me." "Know you?" Chidera laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that echoed off the mahogany walls. "I don't know you. You don't know me. My man is a hard-working, humble logistics manager who gets worried about running out of ramen. My man is a quiet guy who carries my tote bag and respects my boundaries. This person standing in front of me, this monster in a designer suit who rules through fear and plays games with people's lives. I do not know you." "I am the same man," he insisted, taking a desperate step forward. "Everything I told you about how I feel is real. I love you." "Never get close to me again," she snapped, pointing a fierce, trembling finger directly at his chest. "Don't cross my path. Leave me alone. You live in a world built on blood, lies, and shadows. Kang Dior, whatever your name is. I built my life on honesty, peace, and hard work. I am not a prize you get to win by deceiving me." "You can't just leave," he whispered, a flash of his dark authority slipping out purely from fear. "The syndicate saw you. You are my chosen wife now. Walking out those gates makes you a target. I would rather face 1,000 of your enemies than spend another second looking at a coward who couldn't tell me the truth," she shot back coldly. Without giving him another moment to speak, Chidera turned on her heel, threw open the heavy double doors, and walked out of the mountain fortress, leaving the most powerful man in Guryong standing completely shattered in the dark. Chidera's exit drew a brutal, uncompromising line in the sand. She didn't flee the town like a victim. Instead, she went right back to her small apartment, locked her doors, and threw herself entirely into her work. She refused to open her door for Minho. She blocked the chairman's number, and she sent back every single lavish gift, flower arrangement, an apology note untasted and unopened. But a silent, psychological war had begun. The chairman was losing his mind. He couldn't force her to love him. He refused to use his power to hurt her, but his protective instincts turned suffocating. He ordered his elite guards to covertly line her street 24/7. Everywhere Chidera went, she noticed blacked-out CUVs idling at the corners. When she taught at school, a new janitor who looked suspiciously like a highly trained martial artist stood outside her classroom. When she walked the bamboo path, the shadows were thick with his men. It infuriated her. To Chidera, this wasn't protection. It was an extension of his lies and control. Meanwhile, the danger was real. The rejected syndicates from Busan and Seoul were humiliated, and whispers were spreading that the chairman's new foreign bride had rejected him. Sensing weakness in the empire, rival factions began to circle Guryong like vultures, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Chidera was trapped between her furious pride and a deadly mafia world she never wanted to part of. She was fighting a war against his lies, while he was fighting a desperate, losing battle to keep her alive and win back the only true love he had ever known. The air in the bamboo grove was unusually heavy that Tuesday afternoon. Chidera walked with her head down, her mind entirely consumed by the exhausting, silent war she was waging. For weeks, she had successfully ignored the blacked-out SUVs, returned the unopened letters, and treated the chairman like a ghost. But the psychological toll was draining her. She just wanted her quiet, predictable life back. She didn't know that 3 miles away, a convoy of heavily armed vehicles belonging to the Busan syndicate was racing toward Guryong. Their orders were brutal and direct: terminate the foreign woman who had humiliated the underworld, and break the chairman's spirit. At the mountain estate, Minho had intercepted the syndicate's encrypted communications just 20 minutes prior. When the chairman saw the tactical map showing the killers closing in on Chidera's walking route, his heart stopped. There was no time to send a defensive squad to casual positions. If his men engaged the syndicate in the open grove, Chidera would be caught in the crossfire of a bloody automatic weapon shootout. He had to move her instantly, and he had to make it look like she had vanished off the face of the earth. Chidera was just passing the dense center of the bamboo path when the rustling of leaves grew violent. Before she could react, 3 large men wearing tactical gear and ski masks dropped from the foliage. "What on earth?" Chidera gasped, swinging her heavy tote bag like a morning star, striking one man squarely in the jaw. Binders and graded essays scattered into the dirt. But a second man expertly slipped a thick, velvet blindfold over her eyes, while a third secured her arms in a firm, surprisingly gentle hold. They didn't rough her up. They hoisted her up like a fragile porcelain vase. "Let me go. Do you know who I am? I will sue your entire ancestry," Chidera screamed, kicking her legs wildly. She was thrust into the back of a luxury vehicle, the doors slamming shut with a heavy, armored thud. When the blindfold was finally ripped away, Chidera found herself blinking against the soft, warm light of a massive, opulent bedroom. The floors were polished dark wood. The bed was a sprawling king-size oasis of silk sheets, and the towering windows were completely sealed with reinforced steel security shutters. There was no sunshine, no view of the outside world. Standing by the heavy mahogany door, still wearing his tactical vest over a dark silk shirt, was the chairman. His hair was slightly disheveled, and his breathing was ragged. Chidera scrambled off the bed, her emerald green dress swirling around her ankles as her fury erupted. She grabbed a heavy crystal vase from the nightstand, hoisting it over. "You absolute psychotic lunatic," she roared, her voice echoing off the high ceilings. "You kidnapped me in broad daylight. If you think this mafia theatrics is going to make me swoon, You have severely miscalculated my personality. Unlock this door right now." The chairman didn't move. He didn't use his terrifying boss voice. Instead, he locked the door behind him, threw the keys onto a high dresser out of her reach, and ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth like a caged panther. "I am not unlocking it, Chidera," he whispered, his voice trembling with an emotional exhaustion that shocked her. "You can throw the vase, you can break everything in this room, but I'm not letting you out." "Are you insane?" "Yes, I'm losing my mind," he shouted back, stopping his pacing to look at her, his dark eyes raw with a profound, suffocating vulnerability. "For 3 weeks, you have treated me like a corpse. You block my calls. You send back my letters. Do you have any idea what it feels like to live in this empty fortress without your voice? My heart has been racing like an engine about to explode. It is a daily punishment to breathe without you. I am tired of the silence. I am tired of being alone. So we are going to sit in this room together until you forgive me." Chidera lowered the vase slightly, stunned by the sheer dramatic desperation radiating from him. But her anger quickly returned. "You think you can force forgiveness? By locking me up? You lied to me for months, Gungdae. And I will apologize for it for the next 50 years, he said, taking a cautious step closer, his hands extended in a plea. "But I will do it while you are safe inside these walls. I am not letting you go." He didn't mention the Bison syndicate killers who had arrived at the Grove 10 minutes after her abduction, only to find her scattered school papers. He didn't mention that a war was currently brewing outside. He just let her believe he was a desperately dramatic boyfriend throwing a massive tantrum. While the hostage drama unfolded in the master bedroom, Minho was executing the second phase of the chairman's desperate plan. Knowing the Busan syndicate would immediately check Chidera's downtown apartment next, Minho had deployed an elite female tactical operative disguised in Chidera's signature trench coat and a wig to enter the apartment building under the cover of dusk. At midnight, a massive explosion rocked the Guryong riverfront. Rival syndicate agents, believing Chidera was sleeping inside, had firebombed her entire apartment complex. The building erupted into a roaring inferno, turning her home, her furniture, and her translation files into piles of glowing ash. Thanks to the chairman's foresight, the disguised operative had escaped through a basement tunnel minutes before the blast. The rivals retreated, celebrating a successful hit, completely unaware that their target was currently holding a crystal vase hostage in a mountain fortress. By the second day, the situation inside the locked bedroom had degenerated into a hilarious, intensely dramatic stalemate. A massive silver tray filled with exquisite, steaming, food-grilled Korean short ribs, spicy jampong soup, and traditional Nigerian jollof rice that the chairman had forced his estate chefs to learn via YouTube tutorials sat untouched on the table. Chidera sat cross-legged on the floor in the far corner of the room, her arms tightly crossed, glaring at him. "I'm on a hunger strike," she announced coldly. "I will not eat a single grain of rice until you open that door." The chairman, who was sitting on the edge of the bed looking utterly miserable, let out a dramatic sigh. He pulled a chair up, sitting exactly 3 feet away from her. Fine, he said, his jaw setting with stubborn defiance. If you do not eat, I will not eat. Let's see who survives longer, the master degree scholar or the head of the underworld. Great, starve, Chidera snapped. 4 hours later, both of their stomachs let out a loud, synchronized, treacherous growl that echoed loudly in the quiet room. Chidera bit her lip to keep from laughing. The chairman winced, clutching his abdomen. You're a stubborn woman, Chidera, he groaned, staring longingly at the jollof rice. And you are a kidnapping toddler, she shot back. By the afternoon of day 2, thirst became the new battleground. Chidera refused to touch the crystal pitcher of ice water. If you don't drink, I will not drink, the chairman declared, his lips already looking slightly dry as he tried to maintain his terrifying mafia posture while sitting on a plush floor cushion. You look ridiculous right now, you know that? Chidera scoffed, though her own throat felt like sandpaper. The feared chairman, defeated by a bottle of Evian. I am not defeated, he mumbled, his voice a bit raspy. I am participating in solidarity with my future wife. I am not your wife. By the morning of the 3rd day, the exclusive lockdown had reached its absolute limit. Neither of them had eaten or slept properly. The room was a mess of thrown pillows, unread legal books that the chairman had brought in to appease her, and 2 incredibly stubborn lovers staring each other down. Chidera lay face down on the massive bed, staring at the blank steel shutters. Her throat was dry, her stomach was completely empty, and the sheer absurdity of the last 72 hours finally broke through her defenses. She looked over at the chairman. He was currently slumped in an armchair, his expensive suit jacket discarded. His tie loosened, looking completely wiped out. The fierce, untouchable mob boss looked like a deflated balloon. Kundai, Chidera rasped softly. He instantly bolted upright, his eyes wide. Yes? Are you okay? Do you want water? I'll get the keys. Shut up and listen to me, she said, slowly sitting up, a faint, exhausted smile finally cracking through her angry facade. You are, without a doubt, the most dramatic, stressful, extra human being I have ever met in my entire life. The chairman blinked, frozen in place. You kidnapped me because you missed me? She asked, her Nigerian wit returning even in her weakness. Normal people send a text message, Kung Day. Normal people buy chocolates. They do not deploy a tactical squad to a bamboo grove. I told you, he whispered, a sheepish, genuine grin breaking across his handsome face. My logistics are very intense. Chidera let out a long, dramatic sigh, throwing her hands up in defeat. Fine, I give up. You win. I cannot fight this madness anymore. If I don't eat some of that chicken right now, I am going to faint. Hand over the water. The chairman practically scrambled across the room, grabbing the pitcher and pouring her a glass with trembling hands. He watched with absolute adoration as she took a long, greedy gulp before handing her a bowl of the jollof rice. As she took her first bite, she pointed her spoon at him warningly. This does not mean we are completely fine. We are going to have a very long, very real conversation about your job, your lies, and why there is currently a steel shutter over your windows. Anything, the chairman breathed, his heart finally slowing down to a blissful, happy rhythm as he took his own bowl of food. We can talk about anything you want, Chidera. Just don't leave me again. Chidera chewed her food, looking at the Mafia boss, who was currently smiling like a schoolboy because she had accepted a bowl of rice. She shook her head, realizing that her quiet, uncomplicated life was officially over, and somehow she didn't mind it as much as she thought. The morning of the fourth day, the steel security shutters finally rolled up with a heavy, mechanical hum, allowing the bright morning sunlight to flood the master bedroom. Chidera stood by the glass, sipping her tea, when she noticed Minho walking across the courtyard below. He was carrying a small, clear plastic bag containing a handful of charred, blackened metal, the melted remains of her favorite Nigerian bronze bracelet. When the chairman entered the room a moment later, he found her staring at the bag Minho had just delivered. The silence in the room was suffocating. "What is this?" Chidera asked, her voice dangerously quiet. The chairman closed the door behind him and let out a long, heavy breath. The time for games was officially over. He walked over to his desk, picked up a tablet, and pulled up a secure news feed, turning the screen toward her. The headline flashed in bold Korean characters: Guryong riverfront apartment complex destroyed in midnight firebombing. Arson suspected.
Chidera's breath hitched.
She stared at the screen, watching footage of the charred, hollowed-out skeleton of the building she had called home just 72 hours ago. Chidera staggered back a step, dropping her teacup onto the plush rug. The reality of the underworld hit her like a physical blow. They tried to kill me? Because of that stupid competition? "Yes," the chairman said, stepping forward and gripping her shoulders firmly, forcing her to look into his eyes. "This is why I kidnapped you, Chidera. I didn't do it out of a petty tantrum. I did it because your life was being measured in minutes. And I need you to understand something right now. I don't care how much you hate me for lying. I don't care if you never want to see my face again. If I ever find out that danger is coming your way, I will completely ignore your anger. I will ignore my own pride, and I will tear through heaven and earth to drag you to safety. I will violate your boundaries 1,000 times over if it keeps you breathing. Your survival matters more to me than your forgiveness." Chidera stood frozen, his fierce, uncompromising words echoing in her mind. She looked at his face, the raw desperation, the fierce protective instinct, and the absolute devotion burning in his eyes. In that profound moment, a wave of clarity washed over her. Chidera realized that her quiet, independent, predictable life was dead. It had burned to ashes along with her apartment. She was a brilliant woman, and she quickly calculated the cold, hard logic of her new reality. She had two choices. 1. She could remain stubborn, refuse his protection, and try to live a normal, single life, which would turn her into a walking target for every ruthless syndicate looking to hurt the chairman. She would be hunted, isolated, and constantly looking over her shoulder. 2. Or she could cooperate. She could accept the fact that fate had bound her to the most powerful man in the province, embrace his protection, and build a happy, formidable life with a man who worshipped the very ground she walked on. She chose to live. She chose him. "Okay," Chidera said, taking a deep breath and smoothing down her dress. "My life has changed. I accept it. I will step into this world with you, and I will officially be your wife. But do not think for a second that I am going to be a quiet, submissive trophy sitting in this castle while you run around playing Godfather." The chairman's eyes lit up with a sudden, ecstatic hope. Anything you want, Chidera. We're going to have rules, she stated, pointing a finger at his chest. You wanted an intelligent partner, Chidera said with a sharp, triumphant smile. You're getting a corporate auditor. I'm going to clean up your legal shipping routes so thoroughly that the government won't even be able to touch us. The chairman let out a loud, booming laugh, his heart overflowing with a dizzying, profound happiness. He lunged forward, sweeping her up into his arms and spinning her around the room. Deal. You can audit my entire life, my love. While Chidera was organizing her new life within the estate, the chairman ensured that the debt for her apartment was paid in full with interest. That very evening, the chairman left the fortress for a brief 2 hours. He didn't wear his worker's jacket. He wore a sharp, custom-tailored crimson suit. Backed by 300 elite Guryong soldiers, they systematically raided the Busan syndicate's local operations, freezing their offshore bank accounts using Chidera's newly suggested legal loopholes, and dismantling their shipping supply lines overnight. By midnight, the head of the Busan faction was brought to his knees in a rain-slicked warehouse, staring up at the terrifying chairman. You burned a schoolteacher's books, the chairman said, his voice a freezing, lethal whisper as he adjusted his cufflinks. You tried to take the light out of my world. For that, your syndicate ceases to exist in this province. If I ever hear your name whispered near my wife again, I won't just burn your buildings. I will erase your entire legacy. By morning, the rival threat was completely neutralized. Guryong was secure, and the syndicates understood that touching the foreign school teacher meant absolute annihilation. When the chairman returned to the mountain estate, the atmosphere of the grand fortress had completely transformed. The cold, sterile Mafia castle was finally becoming a home. The heavy red carpets in the main hall were lined with fresh flowers, and the rich aroma of traditional West African spices and Korean ginseng soup wafted from the grand kitchen. Chidera had already moved her salvaged books into the massive library, turning his dark, brooding study into a vibrant, sunlit office where they could work side by side. Minho stood in the courtyard, watching his boss walk into the house with a bright, carefree smile on his face, a look of pure, unadulterated joy that the underworld had never seen on the face of the chairman. As the sun set over the Guryong Valley, painting the terraced hills in gold, the chairman wrapped his arms around Chidera from behind as she stood on the grand balcony, looking out over her new empire. Are you happy, my queen? He whispered into her ear, pressing a soft kiss to her shoulder. Chidera leaned back into his warm, solid chest, a peaceful, contented smile touching her lips as she looked down at the bustling village below. I am, she replied softly, turning around to loop her arms around his neck. The logistics of our love story are completely insane, Kangda, but I think the outcome is perfect. Chidera's refusal to join the marriage trials reminds us that love and self-worth should never be treated like a trophy or a competition. When you are secure in your own identity, intelligence, and value, you don't need to chase status or fight a crowd to prove your worth.